Okay. My presentation is called Artificial Intelligence in History, Literature, and More. That's a ton of more. I used up Microsoft for many reasons, and rather than doing a PowerPoint presentation, I was looking for a means to convey it. And I was originally going to write my own presentation program, but due to lack of time and resources, I realized that the program More does pretty much everything I needed, so I just had the whole damn thing run through it. Okay, table of contents, introduction. Okay, concept overview. What is artificial intelligence? Is sort of what I'm aiming to get at in this presentation, or not so much what it is, but how it's been represented and how, because we really don't know what it is, because in order to know what artificial intelligence is, we must know what intelligence is. And that's... And if you know what intelligence is, please tell me, because you're probably the most famous and brilliant philosopher in the world. And I'll be going through, giving some background on myself, and going through I've done a bunch of research on this, and hopefully getting to a point at the end if I have time. Okay, aesthetics, and if anybody's anyone familiar with Asimov, that's a fun off with iRobot, which is a brilliant masterpiece. Let's see, credentials, I have absolutely none. The reason I signed up for this presentation is because it was post-DEF CON, I think it was August 16th or something. I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick, and I like the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, so, and then watching other sorts of sci-fi, and I really didn't know a whole lot about AI, so I figured the best way to learn about it is to sign up to give a presentation on it at con. So that's where this comes from. My history, let's see, I've been working with computers, quote unquote, for the past 17 years really, ever since the mid to late 80s, when I first could. I've been online since 92, 93. Let's see. During, I guess, freshman to sophomore year in high school, I began doing web pages. So this was 96, 97. And during that time, I started the commercial website, allfreestuff.com, which is now defunct. It's been so since the .com crash in 2000. Let's see, since then, since then, what have I done? I've been active in 2600 for the last 4 or 5 years, although political situation with that has gone up and down. It's always oscillating, you're never quite sure what's going on. It's really evident from the magazine, reading it. But I really like the original cause of the magazine, which is the freedom of information, which it is also the point of the whole hacking culture. If you've read Stephen David's Hackers book, which is where I got some of this material from. I'm also going to be working on, with Ilanka Dunham and a few others, on an organization I'm attempting to form called Midwest 2600, sort of modeled in fashion after SE 2600. And actually, if you liked my shirt, please buy it because I'm poor and I really, really need the money. But yeah, here's my website, aesthetics.net. Let's see, mw2600.org, the link to it. And the beautiful thing about this shirt is it's completely open source. I have the JPEGs of these images up on the website. It's at aesthetics.net/pn7. So if you want to take them and get them printed yourself, feel free. Let's see. Interest in AI. The way that I got into artificial intelligence was, let's see. First, Stephen Levy's Hackers. If you haven't read it, read it because it's one of the most brilliant books on agriculture I've ever read. So I liked Levy, and I did a thing where I like to read multiple books by the same author. So I then read Crypto, which I read in conjunction with Ilanka's cryptography work that she's actually going to give a presentation tomorrow. I encourage you all to see it.
At 4.
At 4? Okay, tomorrow at 4. So I picked up Stephen Levy's Crypto and decided to read that, and it was really amazing. So I decided to give it the next step and started to read Artificial Life by Levy, and I'm only actually about halfway through it. So I'm doing the best I can with it. Let's see, fetishes, beat girls, conferences, see, personal ads are hard to do on the spot. So if you want to find out more about that, I have my business card, quote-unquote business, right up here, so just take it and find out more. Next, what is intelligence? Well, these are the questions that I'm going to be attempting to achieve. How can living creatures be imitated and how? How can this be extended to technology? How does, I'm just reading it off. But these are the basic questions that we get when we're trying to deal with exactly what intelligence is and how the knowledge that we get from understanding, honestly, how we work and how we think can be extended and applied to technology. And yeah, I was actually originally looking up history, and there are a bunch of websites that, I have those, and I'm sure a lot of students that are doing it for support for school will just go and, download it and stick it under their paper somehow. And I'd like to note that this was not all just copy-pasted from random history site. Yeah. So, I'd like to begin as far as history goes, Aristotle. I haven't read a whole lot of him. I've read more Plato than I have of Aristotle. But he essentially, I don't remember the book it was that he wrote this in, but he was the first to write down the ideas of the formal notions of logic. I didn't take in logic, you have the, 1 and 0, X over and things like that, which is essentially the foundations of what computers are built upon. This is really cool. Jacques de Casson. This is how I read about an artificial life. This mechanical copper ducky thing, essentially, it's, this is in 1738. I mean, this is pre-industrial revolution. And this guy managed to create this duck that was able to simulate, basically a real duck, that drinks, eats, quacks, does that everything a normal duck would do. And leads to the phrase, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And he was trying to go on that and to formalize upon it. The duck was realistic enough to convince observers that it had intelligence. And as it shows there, this duck was just an amazing marvel for the time being. Unfortunately, I followed up on this duck story a bit, and the duck, it was, the original duck was lost, and another guy found the model that Maupassant was using for the duck. I don't remember the second guy's name. He made another duck, which was also lost. So unfortunately, I have no blueprints nor evidence except for records and historical documents, newspapers and such for history. And if you don't want a copper midget slave, then, who doesn't? Come on. It's like a little copper elf or something. That'd be great. Okay, on to the 19th century. We have different famous mathematicians, George Boole and Charles Babbage especially. The reason I put these guys in is because we can't really have technology and look at artificial intelligence being applied to technology without understanding how these guys work. George Boole established the idea of the Boolean value, which hopefully all of you are familiar with. He was slightly significant. Without him, we wouldn't have Boolean algebra, among other things. Charles Babbage developed the analytical engine. One of the interesting things about Babbage is that he never actually finished anything. He had this thing. He had a habit of picking up all these amazing hobbies and starting to work on different topics and ideas, and he never quite finished all of it. He was a professor at MIT or something, or no, I can't remember where it was. But yeah, he had a really notorious reputation for never quite being able to finish anything. And Ada Lovelace, who I hope that you CS majors are familiar with, she's credited as being the founder of computer science. Essentially what was going on with Babbage and Ada Lovelace was Babbage was constructing mechanical designs for his analytical engine, which was, he noticed patterns in mathematics, and he applied these into mechanical forming to develop a mechanical device that would simulate these mathematical features and essentially form a primitive calculator. That's the best comparison we have to it today. And Ada Lovelace looked at this, and she noticed that different formations of the mechanisms within this machine could be applied to attain different results, thus giving the idea of programming a machine to do something different, like having a single machine that you could program to do different tests, so you wouldn't have to build a new machine for everything you wanted to do. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The reason I include this is because this was published around the time when Industrial Revolution hadn't really started yet, but it was beginning to really build up. And we have the conception of what exactly is Frankenstein? It's a man-made creation. This man, Frankenstein is created life. And examining what exactly it is how society would respond if we were trying to, if we actually succeeded, because we have so many strikes where we're trying to attain this, but what if we actually did create life? She was one of the earlier examples of expressing this view, and it's been expressed later on, as I'll show. And the social inclusion, it just, people generally like to desire something, but they're not happy when they actually get it. That's the best way to put it I can think of right now. Let's see. The second part of history. 1996, Ian Forster's The Machine Stops. All of you are familiar with The Matrix, I'm assuming?
No. What is that?
Yeah, I'm still asking. The Matrix is a terrible movie based on a terrible philosophy that will never be shared in here. But
Very cool special effects.
what? Yeah, it has great special effects. Let's see. But The Machine Stops, the reason I include this is because the ideas in The Matrix, the whole notion of intelligence and having new forms of reality, this is not new at all. And it dates all the way back to 1906. And it actually, I believe it goes farther back than that. That's the earliest solid example I could find on. And the story is brilliant. It's about basically the world being, I don't want to say entombed, but just a machine that makes everything the same, that you could basically have the machine do anything you want. Say you want it to be night, you want it to be dark, you want to have a TV show you're watching, or you can summon anything at your will's request, and you're basically granted satisfaction. And when the machine stops, what happens? When you're set to live on your own again, as opposed to being dependent upon a machine, what's going to happen? It's an amazing story. I have not read this play, Carl Paypeck's R.U.R. I picked this up from reading the introduction to the second in the robot series by Asimov, but it's especially important because it's the first use of the word robot, derived from the Czech word for compulsory labor. So what this tells me is that robot being derived from compulsory labor, what exactly is going on in the world at this time? We have the Industrial Revolution that's building up. Steam engine was developed in the 1850s, I believe, and we're starting to build up these megalopolises, and it's completely changing the front. It's connecting people in a way they've never been connected before, and when people are grouped together in a situation like that, it's essentially the term lemmings. There has to be somebody to do the work, and when people begin to do when people begin to do the same thing over and over every day, honestly, sometimes you can just call them robots because. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, 1927, it's on the releases of Metropolis, which goes along the point where we have this huge corporation, Megalopolis, built up, and these people are finally realizing what's going on, and they get sick and tired of it. They get sick and tired of being controlled. They want their independence again, and they just revolt. And like the enforcer and the machine stops, and what happens there? There are other examples of this. There's I don't remember the year. There's the Charlie Chaplin film, Modern Times. That's an interesting one as far as that's the Depression era. But they all tend to reflect the social environment of that time. And without the social environment being the concept of these massive corporations and the notion of machines doing everything for us, we couldn't have what happens next, which we get the stories of Asimov, including I, Robot, which, as I said, is brilliant, follows the 3 laws of robotics, which, anyone here read I, Robot? Okay. Yes. Okay, so you're familiar. Essentially what this is saying is a robot may not injure a human being through an action to allow a human being to come to harm. Two, a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And three, a robot must protect its own existence as long as it doesn't conflict with the first or second law. So essentially, if you take a look at the word robot here and run back to Carl Capek's play, it applies perfectly. And that point is that's actually the point of the book. Very good. I recommend reading it. And yeah, Asimov is an amazing philosopher. He was a philosopher who expressed his work through writing. This was, I think, iRobot was late 30s, early 40s. Somewhere noticed published. Let's see. iRobot was originally published as a short story in a magazine, and all of his stories were published like that, and they eventually were turned into a compilation. So now, fiction becoming reality. This is where it starts to get interesting. There are two important men. The first one is Alan Turing. In 1936, he conceives of the finite state machine, which, as far as I've found, is the first real proposition for what we now know as a computer. The finite state machine was, it was, if you can imagine a floppy drive or even further back a tape drive, you have a tape drive and you have a read-write head that can write in different states on it, and then you have a chunk of memory. It's a bit more complex than that. I was actually going to make a model, but I couldn't get the resources together in time. But the finite state machine is essentially the foundation for what we know today as computers. The Church-Turing hypothesis is the other thing that Eric recognized Turing as being famous for so far, is that the Turing machine can duplicate not only the functions of machines, but those of nature. And the Turing test, which was absolutely brilliant, is essentially, anyone familiar with the Turing story? Okay. Tell me if I'm boring you. Which was a person who was typing questions into a console, into a computer, and there is a person and a machine, both of which submitter replies to it. And when the original submitter cannot tell the difference between the replies to the person and the machine anymore, the machine has passed the Turing test. Okay. Now, just what defines life? Now that we have the notion of computers, John von Neumann went on to go on the biological ideas we have of what exactly life is. Autonomy, that it is independent of something that can go walking on its own. It can homage for itself. It can find its own food. It has the ability to grow, the ability to reproduce, and it can evolve. And evolution, at least speaking with Darwin, the laws of Darwin, is one of the most important aspects of something that's alive. But the interesting thing about all four of these is that all four of them have also been represented to some extent in different programming language and different forms of programming, such as viruses, polymorphic worms, etc. So, von Neumann, however, because computers didn't really exist at that time, this was 30s and 40s, this is actually World War II, pre-World War II in the middle there, von Neumann coined the term automaton, which is essentially the earliest notion of something that can evolve. And I tried to display it here, it doesn't really look very good. Essentially, you have you got a square there, which contains each square is in a different state, and each state represents, say, genes, like genetics, human DNA. And the tail is the aspect that reproduces, and as the automaton reproduces, it copies its genes into different ways based upon the states of the genes and those around it, and it begins to form different it begins to assume different formations. And there are a lot of interesting theories that have come out of this. However, this delves into artificial life, which, as I've found, is a completely different field than artificial intelligence. Because artificial life deals with what is life, going to the miliary experiments, and going into the more biological aspects, whereas AI is more how we think. And to follow that up, in 1952, the tic-tac-toe game was created for the EdSet game. Tic-tac-toe, it's like anyone who's done electrical engineering work with an oscilloscope, you have these little figures that appear in the oscilloscope by electrical signals, and that's essentially what they call V-inspect them. So, reality check in the 40s and 50s. We have all these amazing technology feats going on in the real, I don't want to say that, in the academic world. And then we stepped up to World War II, and suddenly there's a demand for this. We have the Enigma. Alan Turing did a lot of cryptographic work. The Colossus, which there were a lot of big computers that were developed specifically to crack the codes that the Japanese and for them ultimately the Russians. Let's see, Japanese purple was in World War I. I don't remember what the Japanese code of World War II was, but essentially there were a lot of these big computers that were designed specifically to crack codes, and you have the famous Bletchley Park, and Alan Turing and many other cryptologists were stationed in Britain doing a lot of work for the Allies. And they took a lot of ideas from Newman, and there's a great movie called Colossus, the Corbin Project. I haven't read the book series yet, but the movie itself is really good. It's, I think, 60s, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact date of the movie. But it essentially has the first notion of the Allies the United States builds a computer, and the computer takes on a life of its own, and winds up, I don't want to get too much into it, but let's say it develops a life of its own, and it has some really interesting side effects. And we also have in the 40s Roswell, which is any number of conspiracy theories. You could say that UFOs crash landed. You could say that it was a government project that landed. And this spawned movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, and this led home to a number of different conspiracy theory ideas, and also, yeah, let's see, The Day the Earth Stood Still. I can't remember any other films right offhand. Question? Yeah, feel free to ask questions at any time, because this is the only guidance I have, and I'm trying not to read off it. Going away from the real world, away from the real world and back to geekdom at MIT. John Horton Conway, once familiar with earlier MIT work. Life was essentially, it was almost developed upon the same idea as von Neumann's automaton, except that life was, anyone ever played Go?
Yeah.
Okay. Clinton. It goes upon similar principles to Go, but it's, you have pieces on a checkerboard, or, well, as it was in Conway's office, they wound up growing out through his entire floor and out his hallway. But you have pieces on a square, must move or die. If the piece moves, other pieces are affected by where it moves to. New pieces can be placed on the grid or born, and old pieces may die. And essentially, it's a lot like life. You know, if a human is doing something, a human must do something, or if a human does nothing, which means it's not eating or not, doing anything. All sorts of different aspects will come in, and Conway essentially very primitively started to simulate life in these 4 steps. And this really evolved like crazy, and it made all these different formations. A lot of which are documented. If you read Scientific American from like the 50s, there's a lot of interesting articles about it. Like I was saying, the Martin Gardner column in Scientific America, life appeared in the 1970 issue of it. And Will Gosper, who is those who've read Lee Days, Hackers will know. Gosper was I don't want to say the because in that era he's a hacker. He was a brilliant coder, and he was reading this, and he decided to try to code it into his own computer. And he wound up getting essentially the same results as Conway, but because it was a computer, it went a lot faster, and he was able to observe results a lot more. It was a much more efficient way of observing results. Question?
Regarding Conway's theme of life, you saw it evolving.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, I mean, how does the theme of life evolve? What are you using to determine a higher state of evolution?
As far as evolution, it's Each of the pieces that were on Conway's board had different states. There was life, death, and birth, etc. And depending on what state it was in, these different pieces actually created formations. And it's not the piece and the state of the piece it's in itself, but the formations which they had. All the pieces together. The best comparison would be to take an amoeba, for example. An amoeba being a one-cell organism, and say life when you had, what are those called? The fluids of life, the very beginnings of life, when they interchange with each other and begin to form into different organisms, and you have different cellular structures which combine into organs. And does that answer your question more?
Yeah, I mean, like I understand like how they change states and things, but
Okay.
I mean, like calling some configurations more evolved than others.
That's a really difficult question to answer. It's more the different things they formed. Like if they formed a picture that would say maybe something that resembled a force. I mean, this is really primitive. You can't call modern biology into this guy's work.
Pokemon.
What?
Pokemon evolved. You're all right.
All right. So, let's see. And meanwhile, at MIT, a lot of other kids are developing all sorts of cool things and shit, so things like the ITS, which ultimately leads to what we now know as computers. Martin Minsky, who is a famous professor at MIT, he's multiple several different papers on AI. I've only read a few of them, but he takes the initial ideas of Turing, Asimov, etc. that I've already listed, and he pulls it into the 1960s, and read a couple of his papers from the 80s too. He essentially brings back the same questions of what exactly is life and what we're striving to attain right now. Does it really reflect what we live to be like? Okay, this one is really interesting. Anyone familiar with the Boyd's experiment? Craig Reynolds did this. Essentially, this guy, he was trying to think of a project for a class or something, and he decided he wanted to develop something that would imitate the flocking cycle of birds. And he would go to, there was a park near his house that he would, near his farm, I think it was, that he would go to, and he would sit with friends and he would watch the formation of birds, and he would take notes on this, and over a period of months, he ultimately turned the movement of the flocking into 3 simple steps, which is absolutely extraordinary given the complexity of the formation of the flock seems to have. The first, a clumping force that keeps the flock together, an ability to match the velocity so the birds in the flock will move at the same speed, and a separation force that prevents birds from getting too close to each other, so you don't have birds crashing into each other. It's fairly second nature to all of us. However, he managed to code this into a program which he then ran, and to his surprise, it actually almost flawlessly imitated the flocking style of birds. And he called these boys, and there are a lot of interesting stories that came from there, different, not really mutations, but he would take the flocking birds, he would put hazards in it to see how they would go around the hazards, and it was just amazing to see how, out of these 3 simple rules, he was able to so closely imitate the flocking birds. Then we have Joe Weizenbaum. I think this was actually 80s. I put this in the wrong space. But anyone familiar with Eliza? Yeah, the artificial intelligence psychiatrist, essentially. Let's see. Eliza, that gets into some more interesting things, essentially analyzing not so much speech patterns as how our language works. And Eliza would take, if you were typing a command to Eliza, like, how are you doing? Eliza would take these commands, analyze them, and compare them to given responses, and compare your sentence structure, and prepare a response out of it. And he actually succeeded in making them, I guess, not by modern day, it wouldn't be considered too exceptional, but for his time it was something that actually came close to simulated a conversation with another human.
It was in the 60s, though.
What?
It did come out.
It did come out in the 60s? Okay, thanks.
However, as recently as like 5 years ago at the Chaos Computer Camp, they sent Eliza out to talk to journalists, and they put a brain in a jar and ran wires to it, and fooled the journalists.
I remember it being an AIM bot not so long ago as well. About 5
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Well, it's still around.
I think it was Eliza.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there have been different offshoots of Eliza that go into all sorts of different fields, some of which need not be said.
There was a bot named Buddy in Lambda Moon who got my sympathy every time I went by. He said, it's been a week since PhreakNIC has talked to me. And they really work.
Let's see, going to the 60s and 70s, yeah, do not think about what your parents did. Your parents, to put it bluntly. Different science fiction works by Heinlein in particular, like a Stranger in a Strangeland, I consider one of the most brilliant pieces of fiction I've ever read. Essentially, it takes a man who was born on Mars, a human who was born, he was born on the moon, by the lunar people, and he's transported back to Earth, and it's how he interacts with people on Earth. And it's just a marvel to see how the interaction occurs. You also have L. Ron Hubbard, who went on to form the Church of Scientology. Other interesting works by Kurt Vonnegut, William Burroughs, different PhreakNIC authors, etc. Let's see. You have various TV shows. This is all coming out of the public's perception of what we have in technology. You have various TV shows. I already mentioned Everything's in the Twilight Zone. In 1968, which is the inspiration of this lecture, Kubrick releases 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I hate to say this, but the book is much better. Which essentially points the idea of what if there's something greater than man? What if there's an entity which we don't understand? And it really goes into an interesting tangent on that. And then we start to get things like video games. We have Atari released, what's he got? Norman Bushnell, I believe, is that the creator?
Yeah.
Okay. And you have Atari, and you start to get these games which are based on essentially the AI algorithms that came out in the MIT labs, and except that they're starting to be more targeted towards the general populace. Now we have the 70s. Star Wars is an awful movie. It's terrible acting, and the first and second episodes exemplify this point. Yes?
I like Star Wars.
Sit down and pay attention, you robot. And you also have Friedel Escher Bach, which, anyone ever read this book? Yes, this man is a genius. And I actually started reading that book a year and a half ago. I didn't know what it was, and it wound up coming into AI. And he makes different comparisons like the formation of an ant colony to the human brain, and how different levels of the workings in the ant colony can be compared to that of a brain. How ultimately hierarchy of activity is represented on many different levels. And let's see, it can also be determined like programming languages. You don't need to know assembly very well to program basic, and that's the best way to put it. You have various Atari derivatives that are going on that concept. So we still have evolution of AI in the common world, and we also have various Atari derivatives. The mass populace is being introduced to all these really cool little gadgets that are coming out. 80s, the dawn of the BBS systems and massive propagation. This is where everything just explodes. You have rise of RPG games, Zurich, Ultimate, etc., Softcoin. And the reason I include these is because the RPG has to be, these games, they have to, the enemies that you fight against have to have some sort of way of understanding how the players move. And they each have, especially with strategy games that were released, they had to have certain algorithms that were encoded into the computer that would try to understand how the player was moving. It wasn't necessarily intelligence as we would hope it to be. It was, a nice body inconvenience, which was a derivative that's more encoded of Dungeons and Dragons type style games that were earlier. Now you have movies, war games, which is a classic. Which First Amendment is an interesting is a zine. I recommend it. Check out textiles.com for it. You have Tron, you have Short Circuit, you have The Last Starfighter. All these different movies that are, let's see, Short Circuit, Tron, and War Games to some extent, they all show AI, but they also show how AI technology has influenced computers, or has influenced people in the world. And how we're responding to it. We're getting all this, Short Circuit especially, where you have this robot that gets introduced to somebody who's never seen a robot before, and something that resembles life, and it's very good. And Blue Velvet, it's a great movie, it's nothing to do with AI, but I like David Lynch a lot. So. Okay. Also, PhreakNIC. This is a brilliant film. It's who are the two guys? You have Philip Glass and Francis Ford Coppola that worked on this, and a couple others. And it's essentially a look at how technology has influenced the world and how the world in itself mimics technology. And it's 1983, so it's just when computers are starting to get to a point where mass production of computers can be really the connection can be seen. I highly recommend that film, by the way. I didn't know about it until about a year, 6 months ago. Late 80s, early 90s. I mean, this just shows how far AI has come. Gizmodo, Peter Troopers, Small Wonders, all these different things that, in order for the theory to come so far, you have to have evolution of that to create these TV shows. Virtuality, anybody remember that? Back in like 93, 94, virtuality was, which was you take AI and transform it into artificial reality, and you get full immersion in AI. And you have the movie Lawnmower Man, which I wrote there because that movie is terrible. It's punishment to have to sit through that thing. Like, there's a couple of good parts, but for the most part, it's this horrible, boring drama that sucks. See, mid-90s to the present, we have more movies. We have Existence, which I think, I was bashing The Matrix earlier. I think Existence does a much better job than The Matrix does of expanding the idea that there are multiple levels upon which we live and different perceptions. It's also Shirley Experiments Lane, which, can anyone explain it? Because I can't.
It's completely screwed up. That's really the only way you can. It's about a girl who is not sure where she exists in life, and by the end of if you've seen it and you understood it, please come tell me, because I've watched it twice.
It's basically about a computer program who's very advanced in the cyber world, and there's a flaw in the TCP/IP protocol, basically. But it's version 29. And it allows her to cross over into the real world.
No, they refer to version 4 and say version 6 is going to replace it. So they actually are using that.
Oh, it is 6? Is that what it's supposed to be? I couldn't remember.
Yes.
Okay, so IPv6 allows people to cross over from cyberspace to reality. I didn't know this was implemented yet, but apparently I was wrong.
Watch out.
The better explanation of the gist of the series is that there is a virtual reality that is shared, and everybody who joins in is on the shared network, they can all interact.
Okay.
But
and
people are getting their lives
just because it does with virtual reality.
People like the girl
EVA
have like
is
a special place, but those are God character, which
EVA is a lot easier to explain than Elaine is, though it's not, in my opinion, nearly as good. And it also takes it has completely different points the series makes. But Evangelion has the whole notion of what are those things called? The
angels?
Yeah, the angels. That you have these angels that essentially you put life into. I'm trying to explain that. But it comes out from a different perspective, and it's another interesting way to do it. Okay, now we have modern implementations of AI. Now we sort of understand how AI has been represented and viewed through history, and how it's been developed on the technology side, and how it then transforms into the real world. What do we have in the future? Anybody been to what are the grocery stores around here? I'm from St. Louis. Okay, you got Kroger here. Like in St. Louis, we have grocery stores, Schnucks and Dierbergs, which they're doing this thing called electronic cashiers. I don't know if it's being done around here or not.
Yeah,
but, okay, yeah. which essentially is taking the functions of a cashier, which is pretty rudimentary, pushing buttons. I do it. I'm a cashier myself. And,
Yes, Frankie.
what? Yeah. But taking the functions of a cashier and saying, well, we really don't need this because we can program a machine to do it for us. And it's coming into a whole lot of different controversial issues, just like Rachel's Frankenstein originally predicted back in 1815 or whenever it was written. The same idea is that when we're finally beginning to attain machines that can reflect us, we really don't like it a whole lot. Smart bombs, military technology, especially that are used in military combat to zero in on turrets, to reduce casualties to a minimum. There are all sorts of different military uses for that. Video games are becoming a lot more complex. I kind of left off with Pong and Atari, and I mean, come on, we do in the early 90s, which leads to whatever we are today. I stopped paying attention to it a few years ago. But artificial intelligence in games especially, the physics involved has transformed it exponentially. Graphic rendering, facial recognition, especially with the advances in cryptology and cryptography lately, in the past 10 years, it's necessary to begin to understand different ways of verifying, and of course facial recognition is one way that comes up. And then you have other things like, say, a surveillance camera that's taking photos of a mall area, and you see part of somebody's face, and you have a computer that's able to predict what the rest of their face looks like. So, you know, assuming they're stealing goat porn or something, you can put your mug up on a picture, have the police go after them, have somebody turn them in. You have programs like Mathematica, by Stephen Wolfram, Wolfram also has a lot to do with artificial life, which I didn't really go into much on this. You have programs like Enable. Anybody who's done any sort of math about calculus has used these. But when you take a look at the algorithms that these programs actually incorporate, I mean, they have to use a lot of artificial intelligence as far as branch prediction is concerned, because essentially that's what intelligence is, according to some theories, is branch predictions. Let's see. Important notes and interests. Yeah. Off the RI-11. Microsoft. By the way, these are my opinions, not those of PhreakNIC. Well, yeah, use a picture from the DMC. Yeah.
Fuck Blackboard.
.com.
Hey. Anyone interested?
Since you're all spoke Blackboard.
Yeah. Okay. So these are my references that I cited. Pong thing, that's where I picked up the date or something about Pong when I was using it. Artificial Life, excellent book that I can say for the first half of it. Great Electric Rock is an excellent book for the first 2/3 of it, I can say. The Hacker Crackdown is also excellent. Hackers by Stephen Davey, I, Robot by Nazimov. There are a slew of others that I could list here that I haven't yet, and well, I'm sure you know them. Any questions?
Why did you just blatantly leave Transformers out of the mix?
Transformers.
Because I was really out of it while I was writing this presentation.
Because, I mean, that is, to me, the epitome. It's a thinking machine that fights for its, whatever.
I wanted to know what you thought about the fact that we really don't have a working computer brain and any similants.
That goes on.
I've had two Smirnoffs, so bear with me. What we're going to do, I guess, is how are we going to write computers that can actually think on their own when we don't understand the way the brain works in the first place?
That deals with the question that dates all the way back to the struggles of Aristotle. I wish I could answer that. I actually got into an argument with friends who ultimately proved to me that...
I didn't want an answer, I wanted an opinion.
What?
I know you don't have an answer.
Oh, okay.
I wanted an opinion.
So you want my opinion as to how we can...
Yeah, like what are your thoughts on that? Obviously this is interesting.
Well, you've got all sorts of different impediments that come in, different factors like emotion. You have, say, how somebody's going to react to the situation. Does that reflect on how their brain works? And are you going to approach it from a logical standpoint or a conscious standpoint, a biological standpoint, etc.? My opinion on it, as far as how to do it.
Now, do you think it's possible? I guess.
Possible? Anything is possible.
You're kind of separate. You're confusing what it does and how it works.
Well, see, we can mimic what it does, but we can't mimic how it works. I mean, I can make a program that just says, like the classic example that comes to my mind is the user-friendly script, where Peter writes a program that
You want the microphone?
No. It's where he writes a program and like if you input an A, it says no, and if you put, if you input a vowel, it said yes, and if it was a consonant, it would say no, right? I mean, yeah, okay, that mimics it. It comes up on its own opinion, but it's not really thinking. I mean, when we get right down to it, that's all we have right now. We have ELIZA, we have smart bombs, but we don't have anything that's really thinking. We just have things that are going through if-then logic steps, and that's all we've got. You really have to build those if-then logic steps into a brain, right?
What else is the mind but a bunch of computations going on?
You're absolutely right, but we're not going that route.
We are.
We just don't the mind.
I'm not gonna say.
My response to that, excuse me, sir, my response to that is, what about if somebody just suddenly goes postal? How do you explain that?
Does what?
Postal, goes postal. They just go, that's temporary insanity, they go to
Colonel
postal.
Banning.
How do you explain that?
Well, obviously, they had the proper computations going on, and they were going killing people. I'll say computations do nice things.
It's just need to talk about that.
With the tail recursion optimization.
Yeah.
I guess the basic difference there is when you're talking about that, you're just following, okay, for instance, if you were to take the power of a human brain to do one task, not to think, not to have a personality loop, but just to think, you could blow a computer away, no problem. We think faster, we have more memory, we're way better than computers, okay? But computers blow us away because they don't have to think on their own, they do one specific task, they're programmed for one function. Right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You have to build the brain, you have to make a brain, and at which point they would seem stupid to us.
And that's precisely where we run into the issue of if we were to create a machine that was able to replicate what we consider ourselves to be so much better than that which we create. What if we created something identical to ourselves that dates back to Genesis?
Well, that would be great. I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
That which could lead into other questions of like, when did they betray us and all that, the Matrix.
Yeah.
But the question I'm asking is like, do we really have a chance of that? Or do you know of any projects that are going for that?
I don't know any projects going on right now. Well, the idea of intelligence is worked in many different forms. There's a lot of stuff with robotics going on in MIT's AI lab right now. They do a lot of really amazing things. There was actually, at DEF CON earlier this summer, there was a robot thing that was able to take audio, sensory, and visual input and process it and output different things. Well, it does a lot more than that. I make it sound a lot blander than it really is. But we have several different fields. I mean, some of them are mathematical. We have philosophers that are trying to understand the graphic philosophy, whereas we also have people who are building machines that they think closely resemble themselves, but resemble their creators, but do they really?
Let me try this. There are a great deal of interesting theories about how you go about mimicking the brain. I mean, you obviously can't get the actual chemicals going around. Well, I guess you could, but that'd be really key. So,
Well, we have binaries, so, I mean, we have numbers that can go around, just like our
Yeah. I mean, so there are lots of different projects based upon mimicking the brain at different levels. From like making artificial neurons that can talk to each other, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of like any neuroscience department is very excited. I'd love to talk to you about this for very long time. I mean, so there's lots of research.
The artificial intelligence index you talked about the other? I've got a car here. Give us that. We don't understand about it. We understand how it works.
He's like, yeah.
The mic is open if anyone wants to start some conversation.
Karaoke?